Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humprey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the Blended Pledge. And I'm so excited to be collaborating once again with the team at DCLI. Now, they've joined me on Let's Talk Supply Chain a couple of times to spotlight both DCLI and Rapid Link Repairs. They were episodes 360 and 508 if you want to go and check those out later, wherever you listen and watch the show. But today we're talking about chassis management. Now, beneficial cargo owners manage supply chains with lots of different moving parts. And chassis procurement is a vital piece of the supply chain puzzle that can really make or break your bottom line. There are a range of expenses that stem from chassis inefficiencies, but unfortunately, chassis management is still not always top of mind. And so today I'm joined by two industry leaders who are here to tell you why it should be. We're going to be shining a light on how chassis equipment impacts overall logistics efficiency and the different procurement options available. We'll also be exploring the big considerations when choosing the right chassis procurement model for your business and why equipment control can be a big competitive advantage. We're also going to be sharing why taking a strategic collaborative approach to chassis management is definitely your key to success. Now, remember to let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from. And if you are enjoying the conversation, we love a good fire emoji here. So make sure to put those in the comments as well. And then if you have any questions throughout the show, put those in the comments too. Now, we've got a QR code in the top right-hand corner throughout the show. If you want to get more information on anything that we're talking about today, make sure to go and grab that link. So, welcome to the show, Jonathan and Matthew. I'm so excited for you to join me today. Now, before we dive in, I think we need to get you both to introduce yourselves. So, Jonathan, we're going to start with you. Can you introduce yourself and your role at DCLI and Rapid Link Repairs?
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, Jonathan Beltran, AVP of Sales at DCLI and Rapid Link Repairs. So I oversee all commercial functions for largely our marine chassis business. So that's products such as leasing, pooling, and reserve. And this past year, we launched Rapid Link Repairs, a nationwide road service and maintenance organization. So I lead commercial in that business. So yeah, thankful to be here and look forward to talking about chassis management today.
I loved hearing more about Rapid Link Repairs when we did that episode. I think it was 508, and we did it on site at IANA. It was really great to hear how the company is evolving and what you're doing and how you're thinking about safety and all the different things. So excited to learn a little bit more about everything that you guys are doing and how this can affect the industry, but highly recommend anybody to go and check out that episode 508. Matthew, welcome to the show. Can you tell us who you are, what you do, and give us an overview of your business at eDre?
Of course. Sarah, thank you for having me today. Jonathan, thanks to you for inviting me. My name is Matthew Schissler. I'm a director of business development here at eDre, so anything sales related comes through me. And what eDre is, we're a technology and managed transportation company. We're solving the technology, workflow, and management challenges for everything that involves the movement of containers. Our first product we rolled out is a managed transportation solution where we bring together a team and tech approach as an extension of importer supply chain. From there, we rolled out a different solution, which is agnostic, where it's a fleet management software, and that's part of the reason why I'm joining you here today, is a managed transportation solution to augment the container management we already have in place. This provides a turnkey solution for team and tech where they're entering into a direct chassis agreement with any of the IEP providers out there.
Awesome. Such a needed solution. Now, I want to just address David. We've got quite a few people letting us know where you're tuning in from. David is asking about the transcript. This will definitely be available after we are live today, and we can definitely send you the link to that. So stay tuned for that. So BCOs deal with large supply chains, and I appreciate that it can make things difficult to manage and sort of prioritize what you need to be focusing on, where we put investments in. Like, there's so many things to think about today. So I want to start with you, Jonathan, and ask you, like, why is chassis management or procurement so often overlooked? What is it about this that we're just sort of like, we'll deal with that tomorrow?
That's right. I guess it depends on what type of emoji you want to use to reflect that. But yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's a great question and happy to answer that. I think that chassis are more so not overlooked, but maybe underappreciated, right?
Okay.
Kind of the nature of the business, things have changed a lot over the last 20 years. But when there are periods of disruption in the network, whether it be weather or supply chain challenges, that's where you kind of do feel the impact of chassis. And so your appreciation tracker obviously starts to pick up. But I'd say historically, a couple of things that have driven that, if you look back, ocean carriers had chassis as assets as part of their networks, and they divested those assets in the mid 2000s. And so IEPs like DCLI, which is the largest, came about during that period. And back then, shippers largely chassis were just a part of the chain, but not an important one. And so as that sort of chapter unfolded, became more front of mind as companies like ourselves stood up to serve truckers and shippers with unique products. I'd say second, cost is a challenge, can be fragmented when it comes to the chassis part of the supply chain, meaning that there are hidden costs when disruptions occur. So whether that be through per diem, detention, missed appointments. And so that fragmentation can kind of unwind and really rise to the surface. And I think when those problems do happen, accountability starts to get blurred, right? So rather marine terminals, railroads, drayage parties, if they're being efficient with chassis, and then the IEPs themselves, who is to blame when there are no chassis in a sense, right? But there are a lot of moving players involved in the process. So, I'd say, not so much overlooked, maybe a little bit underappreciation. And I think you just have to go looking for it, and you'll find that if you measure its success, that it's pretty important in the supply chain.
Well, I think it's interesting that you said that up until the mid 2000s, it was sort of taken care of by, I think you said the shipping lines, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so realistically, this hasn't necessarily been on our radar until the mid 2000s, and that wasn't that long ago. So if you've got folks in the industry that have been there through that transition, I mean, they could potentially understand the importance of that. But then you've got somebody that comes in thereafter and not really understanding the history of it. I think that could make a difference. And then also, you kind of said the blame game. We don't want the blame game anymore. That's kind of been the MO of the supply chain industry. I know that for a fact from a logistics standpoint, because it was something that we played, the whole time I was in logistics. But we don't want that anymore. And it shouldn't be that way anymore. And so I'm glad that we're talking about that today and that you mentioned it, because nobody wants to play that. So Matthew, I want to bring you into the conversation. Let's dig into why that small line item can cause a big ripple effect. Like, how can chassis availability impact cost and efficiency? And can you give me some examples? Everybody loves examples. If we can get into some storytelling, I would love that.
Of course. Unfortunately, we only have an hour, so I'll give you a couple of examples. I do this on a day-to-day basis. But when you procure chassis, you're expecting a certain utilization of the assets. The data associated with that chassis is accurate, and that if it's incorrectly used, there's a process for reconciliation on the back end. For example, if the chassis is used for a container that returns back to port on a Friday, and the dray carrier takes it back to the yard for use on a Monday, it isn't their chassis. So you may not have a good process around managing someone else's equipment, which is understandably so. So in our opinion, there needs to be a daily cycle, making sure idle chassis are returned or used in the next move. That incorrect use of the chassis is correcting for the off-hire date and putting the cost to the next shipper. If those aren't managed through the cycle, the weekly, monthly attempt to financial reconciliate these can be impossible. And I've seen that unfortunately far too much. Something that hits unfortunately close to home is one of my customers I'm currently working with is dealing with this on a consistent basis, which can result in shipments being delayed. Then from there, you're disputing charges with the ocean carrier, which results in unfortunately additional work. And then, like you said, the blame game. And then if this inbound shipment is a priority load, this can result in an expedited outbound shipping, which cuts into your bottom line.
Well, yeah. And you used the word idle. In supply chain, when something's not moving, it's costing us money. Right? I mean, I think that's kind of the way that we can think about it. So you use such a great word in that word idle. You also talked about the domino effect in all of that as well. If you don't catch it early, and you are incurring all these additional costs, there are actually even more costs that you're incurring in the fact of the time that it takes to then dispute any of the extra charges that you're going to get for, I would assume, detention and demurrage or different, or just chassis detention too, right? And so it's sort of this domino effect. I mean, the one challenge is you don't want it to sit idle, because anything sitting idle in supply chain costs you money. But then the domino effect of when that does sit idle is that it affects almost every single department in the organization, in the fact that they have to now start negotiating on any extra charges that comes in, and so on and so forth. So it can be pretty complicated if we don't take care of it right away. Now, Jonathan, chassis quality can also create some big issues. What do you think that can look like for BCOs? Can you paint us a little bit of a picture so that those watching and listening can really understand the context of what it might mean for them?
Yeah, sure thing. I think, Sarah, you hit the nail on the head, right? You talked about appointments, demurrage, detention. There are impacts, right, on the drayage, the land side part of the supply chain, and chassis are a component of that. So, when it comes to quality, obviously having poor equipment can lead to failed pickups, storage, potential missed appointments, which then drives that idle time that you described. So that certainly happens. There isn't, I would say, probably a perfect supply chain, right? There's always going to be variables. Especially variables when a shipper doesn't have sort of visibility or control to each part of their network. Now, I think on the quality side, we have our involvement in that, obviously being the IEP, and then there's the reliance on the drayage party to do pre-trip inspections, for example, to make sure that chassis are in good functioning order before they exit a facility. But a couple things like we've done, for example, over the years, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in radializing our tire fleet across the pool. That's been a huge endeavor for us. We're now 95% radialized across the network. That means better tire quality, efficiency, less repairs needed over time. So that's been great. And then from a fleet standpoint, we do, based on what I mentioned earlier, acquiring assets from the lines that were of many decades old at that point. And so investing a considerable amount of capital in refurbing those chassis have been a big part of our strategy. So that's our way to to create some youth in our fleet where possible, and deploy those assets to avoid those quality challenges that you described that then ultimately leads to failed deployments. So reliability is important for us. I think of a shipper, like all parts, want partners to be operating in a fashion that can create stability and consistency in their supply chain, and then not be caught off guard when there's problems or damages that occur throughout the process.
Yeah. And so, like, Matthew, if we step back and take a look at sort of all of the different challenges, the additional costs that we've already discussed in this conversation, but we put it into context of the bigger business picture, how do you think that chassis equipment and management impacts overall logistics efficiency? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about idle, we're talking about if things aren't moving, it's costing us money. But at the end of the day, we also want efficiency, right? We want resiliency, we want efficiency, we're fighting fires, there's disruptions, all sorts of stuff. So talk to me about that.
We're speaking the same language, Sarah. On our side, we see this as a continued maturity of the shippers' import supply chain. Visibility solutions have been around, and it's honestly been a buzzword for like the last 6 years.
Yes.
And shippers are starting to ask the next question: Why is it still sitting where it is? And with that current issue, it is costing me right now. And what is the root cause, and how you can actually fix it for the next time to actually learn from your mistakes moving forward, instead of going through the same things over and over again. In a way, it's not much different from the domestic supply chains that are starting to lease their own trailers as they start to grow and get to a certain economies of scale. The difference with the chassis is it connects and disconnects to the container, making a separate solution that is required for this. This different approach to improving operational efficiency while increasing container throughput simultaneously. The active management minimizes exceptions and delays, improving all aspects of your business upstream as well as downstream.
Yeah, those exceptions are really key, especially right now as we think about AI and automation and all those things, is, managing those exceptions rather than sort of firefighting, is what I said before. Now, before we get into the next part, I do want to give a shout out to Alex over on my personal LinkedIn, and we've got our first few fire emojis. So people are loving this conversation. So let's keep it up, Jonathan and Matthew. So I think there's a clear benefit to ensuring you have quality road ready chassis on hand when and where you need them. Because again, Anything idle is costing you money. But how can BCOs make that happen? I think we should talk a little bit about the different chassis procurement options available. So Jonathan, I'm going to start with you on the first two. Now, one of them is long-term chassis leases from an IEP. First of all, I don't know what an IEP is. Can you just let us know what an IEP is?
Sure.
But what does that model look like, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I like that Jonathan guy who's leaving some comments. So thank you to whoever that is. And then second, IEP, intermodal equipment provider. So we are that. So we provide intermodal equipment, or also known as a chassis. So speaking of chassis, I mean, you asked about a long-term lease. Very simple arrangement. It's an agreement between ourselves and a customer where they ask for a specific number of chassis at an agreed upon rate, with including maintenance packages, for example, and a term. So it's a very simple sort of contract structure where they lease those chassis from us. Now, I'd say the biggest strength of that is control. You have a fixed fleet. It's great. You can use that capacity, deploy that capacity as you need. And that works well when you're in a very highly utilized sort of network. And I'd say the trade-off to that, though, is in volume fluctuations, whether it be high or low, there's a little bit of friction where it's tough to kind of get that lease to a higher level because you need more assets to support your supply chain. Or in periods where there are lower volumes or softer volumes, you continue to pay that price point. So that could be a friction point. So and then there's a downstream impact with leasing, which is management responsibility. You have to maintain the assets and store them and reposition them accordingly. So the flip side, there are other procurement options out there. When we look at DCLI, we have our pool network that has 300 plus start-stop locations everywhere. So you could rent a chassis from us everywhere, essentially railroads, marine terminals all over the country, as well as depots. But there is another program, a hybrid between leasing and pooling, what we call Reserve, which gets you dedicated capacity, refurbished chassis, and basically we ask for a utilization, and you get the benefits of a lease, but build at the effects of the pool, which is on a usage level. So we've started to see sort of a migration of different procurement options out there for chassis. And then because we love offering so many options, we came up with Rapid Link Repairs. So we said, even if you're not using our chassis and you have another chassis of a different color, we'd love to service you. And so Rapid Link Repairs offers that maintenance, that road service to those assets out there across a shipper supply chain. So I think we are seeing a lot of options evolve over the years, especially coming out of the pandemic. But I'm glad to see where it's heading.
So I think one of the options, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but the BC owned private chassis fleet. Now, from what I understand, this is a bit of a costly option, but I think it potentially gives the organization a little bit more control. What does that option look like, and who would that be best suited to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the costly sort of perception is similar to the overlooked. I think it can be costly in some instances if you're not working with the right providers, but I'd say the inverse can also be costly. If you don't have a private pool and you're at the mercy of the market, then you have to deal with the market from a supply and demand standpoint, which ultimately ends up in price, right? So private pools are sort of more dedicated product where we can set up those pools for shippers. Historically, they've been a little bit more VIN specific, meaning their own stenciled chassis at a certain depot. We've kind of evolved to maybe a form where Reserve now reflects that, which is now a gray chassis at a pool location, and a BCO can have the same benefits of a historical private pool, but in a new form that's more efficient for the IEP to monitor and manage. So private pools are important. They obviously give you guarantee and capacity. We see that as a success for some shippers, and we also see alternatives that are starting to evolve out of the historical private pool model.
Yeah, I like the fact that there's a lot of different options. One question for you, though, for this private chassis fleet option, at what point do I sort of look at that as an option? Like, what do I look like as an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, shippers come in all shapes and sizes. And frankly, you just need really a regular volume pattern. So you don't have to be the largest super shipper, call it. And that consistency allows you to manage your drayage and your chassis. And so, and also private pools can be stood up largely anywhere. So there's not really a tipping point or a scale. It just really depends on the strategy behind the procurement team. If they really want to see that line item from a cost standpoint, and then just measure that capacity better. So, and we see all different shapes and sizes of private pools.
Okay, I appreciate you for sharing that with me because I know I'm not the only one that was thinking that. Now, Matthew, I think one of the other options is also to have chassis costs embedded into carrier contracts. Now, this sounds like it would deliver more cost consistency, but I'm not sure if in the landscape of visibility as sort of king, like you mentioned earlier, if organizations are comfortable now with this type of model. What's your take on the pros and cons of this one?
So, like you said earlier, people haven't had a lot of exposure to this because this is relatively new to shippers potentially going out and looking at their own chassis. So, great question. Thank you for that. But the reality actually is nothing is free. And moving a product from point A to point B, and chassis costs are no exception to that. It's really a question of cost, availability, and complexity. We help take out the complexity of it, but the cost and availability are still a trade-off that still matters. Unbundling different services as a general statement is the mark of a continually evolving supply chain. Personally, for me, I've seen a lot of shipper signs contracts with ocean carriers for store shipments, for example, and the chassis fees are baked into the rates. Some ocean carriers are, as a result of offering this, offer stop clock provisions once the container is unloaded. This helps your organization potentially mitigate additional demurrage, but on the flip side, I've seen customers suffer from a decrease in service, and then from there, getting a little bit of a logjam at your distribution center.
Yeah. There's so many pros and cons to each one of these. And I think it also depends on where the organization wants to spend. And I always call them the risk dollars. So we always have choices in the fact that there's different approaches to different things, like we're just talking about today. And there's always an element of risk, right? And so which one to our organization and how we think about it is going to present the most risk, or where do we want to put our risk dollars? And so that's essentially, I think, what we're talking about today, and how you're going to sort of analyze each one of these different options. Now, Jonathan already talked about the hybrid sort of market by market mix. Matthew, do you have any additional thoughts on that sort of like hybrid model that you wanted to share?
Of course, we think IAPs, like for example, DCLI, are coming up with different models that are able to meet shippers, forwarders, and trade carriers contracts. So it really just depends, just depending on your business overall. We help our customers model out the best solution for them so they can properly source and ultimately realize the savings they sign up for with their organization, and to be able to see it actually come to fruition. We recommended a blended approach between the dedicated, flex, and pool chassis to ensure our customers are getting the best bang for their buck ultimately at the end of the day, while still achieving that high chassis utilization rate.
Yeah, I think, we're hearing that word hybrid sort of across everything that we kind of do, right? Hybrid model of going back to work, hybrid model for chassis. Right. And so I think that just goes to show that we're meeting organizations and business leaders, decision makers where they're the most comfortable. Right, Jonathan?
Yeah, that's right. I would agree. I think you said that well. Things are changing, and you connect that back to risk, right? You want to de-risk your network. We've seen a lot of volatility in the global ocean supply chain. And so, we've learned a lot from the pandemic, which, believe it or not, was 6 years ago, which is incredible to think. And so, I think de-risking it should be a core tenet of any, procurement strategy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mentioned technology a little bit earlier. I mean, I said automation and AI. I don't know if you can have a conversation without AI, but I do want to talk about technology integration, because I think it's key to all of the things and the different options that we're talking about today. So, Matthew, I want to start with you. Let's talk about GPS technology. What impact can that have on tackling some of the challenges that we've been talking about? What does that do?
Well, when you're talking about technology, that's part of the reason why I'm here. Regarding the GPS, though, this is a requirement for our solution because we need to know where the chassis is to ensure we're actively and effectively managing these on a daily basis for our customers. When things go missing, it's extremely helpful. When calling someone to ask to move a chassis or put back into a circulation, it's helpful to know exactly where it is. And there are some really cool things you can do with triangulating and the expected location of the container with the actual location of the chassis underneath it. So truthfully, there's some magic from there. And it's weird to say there's magic in supply chain, but coming to the solution that we bring, there's a lot of magic.
And I think you probably came up with that because you were, you didn't like hearing, where's my chassis every single day.
No, not at all. And Jonathan, I'm sure you don't like that either.
No, I don't. We need some magic emojis to come up now. We need a
Hey, Jonathan, feel free if you want to put some, what is it, crystal balls maybe? I
crystal
don't know. Somebody find a magic emoji and put it in the comments because I want to see what you come up with. All right. So, Jonathan, how do we guarantee capacity is a competitive advantage for BCOs? How can we do that? I mean, everybody's talking about the competitive advantage. They're talking about how can I differentiate myself from the competition? How do I use my supply chains to do that? And then more specifically, how do I use capacity and chassis to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to spend a lot more time on it, but I'll try to be sort of pointed. And because I think that everybody wants guaranteed capacity, but then are you going to pay for it is one. Two, is it easy, for you? Is it accessible? And three, are you working with the right partners to ensure that you have all that, sort of taken care of?
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's so important in our business. Again, back on the de-risking. So the guarantee of capacity, we certainly have, again, models like private pools, reserve, even leasing to a degree to sort of shield shippers from unpredictability, right? Especially in times where we see volume patterns shift dramatically. We're seeing that play out, obviously, with a lot of changes from the administration on tariffs and how that's a trickle, a stream effect on the supply chain. So, more importantly now, it's looking ahead, right? It's fast forwarding and saying, if something goes wrong, do I have an outlet? And I think there's channels to do that, working with IEPs like ourselves to have the conversation. And there may be instances where, again, kind of back to that market by market, where in one market you may be taken care of through your other channel partners and you feel fine and feel you've done that calculation. But in others, you may see a bit more exposure in that you may want to, come up with a model where you do have guaranteed capacity. We see that play out a lot at the ports, certainly because of marine terminal operations and the fluctuation of shipments from ocean carriers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Matthew? You have anything to add to that?
Of course, Jonathan, all those are great points. Just a few things to add from my side. So number one is just overall just speed to market. Having the assets when you need them are extremely helpful to make sure that you're able to plan and then operationally execute on top of that to minimize the delays, to ensure you're meeting product launches and to meet customer demands, as well as inbound planning. When I speak with many shippers, inbound visibility and warehousing staffing continues to be a pain point. When a shipment hits their plan, everything runs smoothly. And then last but not least, like Jonathan said, with the current administration putting some strain on overall just importers in general, and for me on my personal life, minimizing the exposure, detention, and especially drayage accessorials are able to help you preserve your bottom line.
Yeah, well, and that's what a lot of people are looking at. A lot of organizations, there's some pressure on supply chains because obviously with those tariffs coming in, the costs of the goods have gone up, the cost of shipping the goods have gone up. And so there's a lot that goes into that bottom line that the organizations are putting some pressure on the supply chains. And so I think that it's really important that you get your partners right because like you said, Jonathan, you want to be able to rely on them. Right? You want to know that they're in your corner and they're thinking about all the different things that you might not be thinking about today, about your bottom line tomorrow. And that's what makes a good partnership. And that's really, I mean, I talk about this all the time. I say collaboration is the future of business. I have a sign behind me that says that. And this is really the true essence of what that means. This conversation today, bringing both you, Jonathan, and Matthew together, but then also being able to rely on the partners that you're bringing in to really help you mold and shape the different parts of your supply chains, which really is only one part of the organization. And there's so many different moving parts. So it's important to do that. Now, I want to just a friendly reminder to everybody. If you're just joining us, make sure to put in the comments where you're tuning in from. We also love a good fire emoji. So if you like the conversation, put that in the comments as well. And then if you have any questions, we're going to be answering all of your questions in just a little bit. And so if you have any questions, put those in the comments because we want to get to those as well. And remember, just a a friendly reminder, the QR code is also going to take you to a link that's going to give you some more information about what we're talking about today. So make sure to grab that. Now, we've talked about the different chassis procurement options available. We've talked about the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses, but how do businesses know what model is right for them? And I kind of asked you a little bit about this, Jonathan, earlier on, but Matthew, I want to start with you because I want to talk about, do they audit their operations to sort of understand where their unique challenges and opportunities might be? And if they do that, what does that look like? Where do they start with that audit?
So everyone starts at a different point, but from me doing this for a long enough time, I'd recommend starting with three main things. The first one's going to be a review of your inbound flow, your current container lifecycle, and then ultimately at the back end, your financial workflow and everything that's tied to that. Having a good understanding of these has been proven to be impactful in boosting operational performance, which translates to savings. As well as at eDre, we see the audit as a part of a daily and weekly cycle. Reconciliation of data, misuse, and overall management on a daily basis helps us keep things clean. On the weekly and monthly basis, looking at trends, savings, utilization, and forecasts gives you what to look forward to and to look back to be ultimately successful moving forward. And at the end of the day, that's what eDre is here to do, to be able to help support our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give a shout out to Alex over on my personal LinkedIn. He found the magic wand emoji, just so you know, Jonathan. And then so did Scott. I just put it up on the screen. So they found our magic wand emoji. We need to use that a little bit more often, I think, in these conversations too.
I like it.
I love that. Did you have anything else to add on what Matthew said, Jonathan, just about auditing and sort of, where they can find some of their unique challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, it's working with the right partners. I think you led off with collaboration and just doing your due diligence. I think we've seen, and this, Sarah, over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of new entrants in the marketplace that offer a lot of similar services. And so trusting the right partners is something that you have to have a strategy about, right? And change management also is part of that strategy. So I was just at a conference in Orlando, a big retail conference, right? And we were there to network. We were there to talk about change management. So I just think we're collaborating with new partners is important to have a successful change management process.
Yeah. And just for the audience that's watching, now is a really great time to put a question in the comments. If you haven't done this yet and you're sort of thinking about doing an audit and wondering where to start, now would be a good time to put that in the comments, because now's the time for us to sort of answer those types of questions. Now, Matthew, how can businesses then evaluate sort of the options available, right? And cross-reference them against their needs to determine which model is right for them?
Of course. Here at eDre, we have a modeling tool that we've established to draw a proper fit line, going back to high school days and just all the different things that go along with math. For model use by market, the quantities to secure, and the secondary and tertiary solutions as and if needed in other markets. It's important to periodically reevaluate these to ensure that the key assumptions in the model are still true, because the supply chain is always constantly just evolving and changing year to year. Another thing to add is, do you have an adequate amount of space in your facilities to be able to hold these chassis if you're deciding to go dedicated and when they're not in use? And then last but not least is just ultimately just look at your contracts. I mean, you just need to make sure that the models that are presented in front of you are able to work with what you currently have in place.
Yeah, contracts are really key. I mean, we're talking about procurement, and procurement is all about negotiation and contracts and what that looks like. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a key part of what we're talking about when we talk about procurement and what they're, responsible for that organization. So I think that's a big part of it. Want to give a quick shout out over on the Let's Talk Supply Chain Instagram from Morocco. I don't know your name, but your handle is Barnouzi Supply Chain. So we want to give you a shout out over there. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. So when we think about potential partners, and Jonathan, you and I have both sort of touched on this already. And so Matthew, I'm going to ask you and then come to you, Jonathan. How do you think businesses should approach potential partners? Like, are there specific questions that we should be thinking about asking when we go to that initial call or that meeting to really understand whether they're the right partner for us?
So this might be a bit surprising when we're just talking about wheels and steel, but relationships honestly matter more than you know. Knowing that there's a contract in place, but also when things change, can be extremely helpful when deciding a partner. You need to make sure that they're flexible given your needs. We've seen DCLI as a group that leans into that. In addition, you need to be transparent with your drayage partners to ensure they're able to deliver on the requirements that you put forward. I'd recommend asking your dray carriers to be able to break up the line haul and fuel surcharge, as well as the chassis, to make sure that they're still profitable and still getting the amount of money they need to be able to do their job. So you can also bring this new solution to be able to help you in your organization.
That's a great point, right? Line items. I remember when I was in logistics, the commercial invoice, if it was prepaid cargo, right? You want to make sure that the freight line is out from the actual commodity line so that you're not paying GSTs and duties on that. And so that's a completely different example, but you know what I'm trying to say. And I thought that that was a really great point. Jonathan, what do you have to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt really teed it up very well. Those are all great questions, very tactical, kind of more execution. I think, if I'm in a procurement seat, there are a lot of providers that come, right, and have a lot of sales pitches, call it, right? And so you have to kind of read through that noise in many cases. So, doing your research, right? Starting with scalability, who is this organization? What are they about? What's their network look like, right? If I were to onboard this company into my network, how do they integrate, right, into the rest of my supply chain? I think, again, back to that change management comment, is if you bring another provider or partner in, do they help your ecosystem or do they create a friction point? So, we've seen that kind of play out, right? And also, I think ultimately, right, data. Supply chains are all about data. So we don't just want to be a chassis provider where we drop the equipment and we say, good luck. We want to be able to DPS all those assets with products like Reserve, be able to ping all that data to channel partners like a eDray, right, which then connects to your containers and ultimately your end-to-end. So, so we see, I think, just asking those questions around, scalability, right, data integration into their platforms, and then just how does data work, and then you'd come away really digging through sort of the noise of what a typical sales pitch would be and get down to sort of brass tacks in a way.
Yeah. I think one thing that I would add to that is also security of that data.
Sure. Yes, very much so.
What's happening with my data? Where's it going? What are you doing with it? How secure are you? What are your cybersecurity?
Yeah. And there's contracts that we have with parties where you establish controls and language to help protect both parties in that.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that in as a question because that's coming up so much more. Cybersecurity is at the top of a lot of people's minds, especially with data and the integration of technology. And so just wanted to add that one in. Now, Matthew, what kind of lessons have you learned at eDray?
That's a loaded question.
So much, right? There's so much.
One of the first things that I've learned at eDray is just overall, I recommend when shippers, BCOs, are deciding to go down this path, I recommend that they take out the leases on their own. You don't want to be tied to the hip to potentially a carrier partner that falls down on a consistent basis. You're contractually locked into them for a certain period of time. So taking the lease out between you or potentially eDray would be really helpful to be able to move away from those dray carriers if issues do occur. The next is going to be, this is just a massive savings opportunity. One of my customers over the past few weeks said, "This seems too good to be true. What's the catch?" There's no catch. With this, it's just a great opportunity to continue to tighten in your destination operations to ultimately deliver. Next, it's going to be consistency is key to a high performance supply chain. So to be able to have chassis when you need them, where you need them, is really important to be constantly delivering on time as expected. The next point is going to be, in my opinion, it's nearly impossible to manage these chassis without technology, and that's part of the reason why I'm here. Dray carriers can be using chassis for other customers. For example, we saw a customer with a chassis in Las Vegas when they only go to LA. So trying to minimize those issues are really impactful with technology. Next is going to be just overall when you're evaluating chassis, just to minimize exposure on your side, is to make sure that the company that you do decide to partner with includes M&R, just to make sure that if a chassis gets damaged, you're not on the hook. And then from there, you're paying a lot more than just a daily chassis fee. And then last but not least is relationships matter.
Mm-hmm. So just for everybody who may not know, M&R is maintenance and repair.
Yes.
Yes. You said M&R. I was like, wait a second. I got this.
In the language.
And then, well, we've got so many acronyms. It's one of the reasons why I created a supply chain dictionary. I think there was 107 pages to our dictionary of just acronyms that we use in this industry.
Well, just the comments there are a lot of new people in our industry, right? It's getting, so top major now in colleges. So yeah, I didn't have a glossary when I first started. Let's just put it that way.
Super important. And that's why I just ask, that when we use an acronym, just to let everybody know what we're talking about. But one of the things that you said, too good to be true. Well, the only way that people are really going to be able to understand that is to reach out to you. So I want to suggest to everybody watching and listening to reach out to both Jonathan and Matthew if you have any additional questions to any of this. We are going to get to audience questions in just a minute. We have a bunch of them, so stay tuned. But Jonathan, one last question before we do that. Do you think there's anything else businesses should consider when choosing the correct chassis procurement model? Is there anything that we have not covered that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Matt, or I'd say the company like eDre has really layered on a suite of call it extension or services that help, again, back to that integrator piece. And that as a chassis provider and us, being an important piece of providing those assets and then services there, again, just considering the right model depends on how does it all fit into your ecosystem. And sometimes, remember back during the pandemic on the back end of that, those couple years, companies were forced into whatever model that they could at the time because warehouses were full, they needed wheels, right? We had to get freight moving. And so you see a lot of unbundling of those networks that we're seeing now. And so again, things like reserve and how you manage leasing. And then as you go through your chassis procurement process, that it fits into your overall container visibility and integration for your supply chain. So yeah, it's kind of loaded because it can go many different ways, but I'd say the unbundling of models in the past few years is starting to provide new opportunities.
Well, and I think it opens up an opportunity for collaboration between procurement and supply chain.
Right.
Not that we need any more reasons to do that because I think it's just good business. But I think it does open up that opportunity. All right. So now it's time for us to get to audience questions. Remember, if you have a question, now is the time to put it in the comments because we want to answer all of your questions. Your chassis strategy, where to start, your audits, all of what we've talked about today. So the first question that I have for you, and I'm not sure who this should go to, I'm guessing it goes to Jonathan. This is from Alex. What metrics should I be tracking to know where my chassis strategy is working? This is a great question, right? Because you can decide on a strategy, but what are the KPIs and success metrics to really understand whether it's the one for me or not?
Yeah, it's a great question, and again, it's thank you for asking it because data is at the heart of our organization. It all comes down to the utilization of that chassis. So depending on which model you have, whether it be a lease, again, reserve, or maybe even the pool, that once that chassis is out on the street and you hope being used at all times, what's your utilization level? Is it parked or stored over a weekend and you're still paying per day on that asset? Right? Or is it being highly utilized and you're doing a load, you're unloading it, you're grabbing an empty at a port and you're just cycling that chassis to its full extent. So that's important. Dwell is an important measure. We track dwell very much so across our networks, particularly in our pool. And again, across your network, are you trying to pressure that dwell down as low as possible? Now that dwell is impacted by, how is the inventory at the warehouse? How is the lines at marine terminals, right? Where it gets so long where sometimes truckers have to turn around and go home for the night, which is so unfortunate. And then the shipper ends up paying another day when they had nothing to do, with that occurring. So monitoring that dwells is important and trying to, keep that as low as possible. So I'd say those are two kind of easy KPIs and utilization and dwell. And then, overall spend, right? Just making sure that if you do have a goal for your budget for the year, how are you tracking towards that goal from a chassis standpoint?
So great, because a lot of times we look at new investments, we look at new partnerships. We of course all go into it with great intentions of it working, but just sometimes we do make the wrong decision and it just doesn't work for us, and another solution might work for us. And it doesn't mean that the partner's wrong. It just means that the solution might need to be a little bit manipulated to really fit our needs and what we're looking for. And I think understanding what success means to you as a supply chain leader, a leader in the business, the organization in itself, understanding what success means to you, I think goes a really, really, really long way. All right, we've got another question from Kate. What should I look for in a chassis partner to support long-term efficiency? Who does that go to? Does that go to you again, Jonathan?
Yeah, probably me. I work for the
Sorry, Matthew.
I don't want to put that on Matthew here, but yeah, I mean, efficiency, it's something, tough to measure, right? In a way, I mean, it could be intangible at times. How efficient is an asset? How efficient is your supply chain? There's all these different KPIs. I think it goes back to who you're partnering with. I know Matt mentioned relationships. I think that's important. To the health of the organizations in which you're operating with. I mean, I'll be transparent. We've been in a freight recession for the last few years. We know landside transportation's been challenged from a pricing standpoint. I do believe it will turn like it always has, and I'm looking forward for all our partners, both the motor carriers, ocean, and everybody to support that turnaround. But viability is important, right? And so companies that are in a pretty strong position in the marketplace from a market share standpoint, asset utilization, is important to measuring the efficiency of what your long-term strategy is when it comes to choosing a chassis provider.
Yeah, and I go back to what I was talking about as far as like the success, what that means to you. What does efficiency look like for you as well? Because I think it's going to look different to different organizations, and especially how they organize their chassis strategy and what that looks like.
Agreed. I think Matthew showed, he's got results there with his customers, and we want nothing more than for assets to be utilized and be leveraged efficiently.
Yeah, we don't want anything sitting idle, because remember, anything sitting idle, especially in supply chain, is costing us money.
That's right.
Okay, so we've got one last question from the audience. Unless anybody else has anything else they want to ask, make sure to put those in the comments. This one says, if a BCO wanted to audit their chassis strategy, where should they start? We kind of answered this question in the conversation, but it's not a bad idea to revisit that and let everybody know where they should start. Who wants to take that one? Jonathan?
Maybe Matt. I don't know if you.
All right, let's do it.
Not to tee it to Matt, but if you'd like to, I took 2 already. So.
Not a problem at all. I think this is honestly a great time for you just to overall audit your chassis strategy as you go into contract season with TPM coming up in a month, where it's kind of the kickoff to overall the ocean, drayage, all these different bids that are going out. See what's included, see how long things are sitting out, and then from there, have a conversation with Jonathan or I at the end of the day. I mean, when it comes down to it, we're putting substantial savings out there to the market that you're able to capitalize from. And then last but not least, with our management on top of this, we're able to help you effectively move your chassis, containers, and increase container throughput, which helps things not sit idle. And last but not least, helps you save dollars. So.
Yeah, love that. So just a friendly reminder, I've got a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. Make sure to grab the link with that QR code in the top right-hand corner. That's going to give you more information about what we talked about today. So let's wrap up with a couple of questions. Now, ultimately, why do you think a strategic collaborative approach to chassis management is the key to success? Like, what's one key takeaway from this discussion that you want folks leaving the discussion thinking about or maybe taking action on? I'm going to start with you, Jonathan, then we'll go to Matthew.
Sure. Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to kind of sort of round third there. I mean, look, chassis are the smallest asset with the biggest ripple effect, and we saw that again during the pandemic. And as we look forward in supply chains, it really is becoming more of an important part of success for all companies. So when your chassis management strategy is misaligned with the rest of your supply chain, it could lead to, again, opportunities for disruption or pockets of risk or vulnerability. So when it's managed strategically, it really does give BCOs the control, the visibility, and the reliability they need to keep their freight moving. So I think we touched on relationships, collaboration, all those things are great, but really the sort of valuing the effects of if things go wrong, right? Am I prepared to handle that with the right partners?
Yeah, because disruption's all around us. And don't think I didn't catch on to that baseball analogy, Jonathan. That was a good job throwing that in there. All right, Matthew, what's your one sort of key takeaway for success that you'd like everybody to walk away with?
Well, so for EJ, where we stand within the import supply chain, we don't have chassis, we don't have assets. For us, we need collaboration between the different stakeholders, whether it be DCLI or other IEPs out there, to ensure that we have the connectivity, the assets where we need them and when we need them, to ensure that we're delivering on promises we give to our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, what's some advice? Like, what advice do you want to leave everybody with for enterprising BCOs looking to take more control over this process, maybe this link in their supply chain? Matthew, and then we'll end with you, Jonathan.
Perfect. So it's 2026. I know that the chassis solution is relatively new to some people out there. But one thing I want to say is just don't make any assumptions. Technology is improving at a rapid rate and it's accelerating. And that's part of the reason why I'm here today, to be able to connect all the different stakeholders within the import supply chain. Next is just don't look, take some action. I mean, look, like if there's something out there that you can potentially save money on and get the same service or improve service, you need to go do it or at least evaluate it, because from what I've seen, a lot of importers are currently struggling just given the tariffs and things that the current administration have put in place. So, and last but not least, the additional management on top of that is helping you be able to identify issues early on in the process so that they don't snowballs into a massive exception and ultimately causing you a lot of money down the line. Next is just look at your overall import supply chain and look at potential markets that you can pilot and pilot the solution to be able to see firsthand. And don't take it from me. I can get you in touch with some customers to be able to hear it from them directly. And then last but not least is speak with all the major IEPs to ensure you're getting a solution that best works for your organization. DCLI has been a great partner for us, but there is other providers out there.
Yeah, in the market. That's such great advice, and I appreciate that, Matthew. All right, Jonathan.
Yep.
Last but not least, you've got the last word, although I'll do a bit of an outro, but you've got the last word.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your word more than mine. But listen, Matthew said it very well. I think he did a good job there highlighting it. And I mean, I'd keep it simple, right? We got to stop treating chassis like something you just hope works itself out, right? And major retail brands, shippers of all types, both exporters, importers, commodity guys. I worked at the railroad, both in intermodal and carload. I worked at 2 global shipping lines at CMA and Hanjin. So I've worked with shippers across different modes, and chassis, it can't be treated like something that's just to be forgotten about. But controlling those variables, we talked about that a lot. De-risking your supply chain, all those things really fit into kind of where the conversations are heading today, and giving shippers the platform to control that capacity is more available now than it was many years ago when I talked about when lines divested assets and how things have changed since the mid 2000s. So it's I'm excited about where we are as a company, where our strategy lies, and where the market demands services like we talked about today across our portfolio.
Yeah, such great advice. And I think, our audience is walking away with a lot to think about and take into consideration. I think it's been great to hear how that small line item, that overlooked chassis management, can just become such a major cost and domino effect within everybody's organization. And in today's climate of intense scrutiny on budgets, cost cutting, particularly from supply chain, businesses just can't afford to overlook some of these inefficiencies anymore. But I think it's so good to hear that just by working with a partner like DCLI, you can reduce avoidable costs, create efficiencies, and drive competitive advantage for your business. So if you're looking for a partner who understands your supply chain and can develop market-based solutions that optimize your end-to-end intermodal operations, check them out. Go to DCLI.com. Now, I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who joined us today and shared your fire emojis, your magic emojis, and where you were tuning in from. Really appreciate each one of you. And then a big thank you to Jonathan and Matthew for joining me today and sharing such great insights. I hope everybody has a great day, and we're going to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.